Check, check. We're back on the podcast grind. Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode number 6 of the GTL podcast. I am Bill King, your host, and we took a little bit of a break from the podcast, but we are back to the grind. If you've been listening so far, thank you so much. If you could share, like, subscribe, do all that cool stuff, it really helps the algorithm. Today on episode number 6, we have Kevin Indig. Kevin is a friend. He is also the Director of SEO at Shopify. He was the VP of SEO and Content at G2. Before that, Head of Technical SEO at Atlassian. This man has forgotten more about SEO than I have ever remembered in my entire life. Kevin is just a really sharp guy. We became good friends through the pandemic and have just traded thoughts on a lot of different things: growth, SEO, management, scaling up, all the things that come with career growth. And I'm really appreciative that he spent some time with me today on the podcast and shared some thoughts about how you can be more of a strategic thinker. There's so many great nuggets in here. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Again, share, like, do all the cool stuff to help us. We'll talk soon. Enjoy episode number 6. Peace.
Go! We all gotta grow. This is not optional. That's why we need to start the show. Growth theory optimal. Growth is full of obstacles. Spark a hypothesis. You gotta play your hand. Don't just wait and be an optimist. And now it's time to know what growth theory is. Let's build. Bill King, host of the show. Here he is. We going all in. We unstoppable. Check it out. This is Growth Theory Optimal. You're checking out the Growth Theory Optimal podcast with your host, Bill King.
Kevin Indig, my boy, is in the house. Let's go.
Let's do this.
Episode number 6. What's up, man? How you doing?
What's up? I'm good now. How are you?
Freaking fantastic. Thank you for coming on. I feel like I've been talking about doing a podcast. You actually were one of the people that inspired me to actually get started, because I was like, I want to do a podcast. You were like, just do it. And that's it. And then that's it. Introduced me to the editor, got everything started. So thank you for going down the rabbit hole with me. I really appreciate it.
It's just the way I say things because I'm German. It's just always very forceful.
That's it. You were like, Bill, you need to get this done. Let's go. I was like, okay. So I literally started the next week. So that's it.
I love it, man. I love it. Yeah. Good idea. Very good idea.
Yeah. So episode 6. Thanks everybody for joining. We keep it pretty casual here, Kevin, as I'm sure you're aware. So first of all, if you don't know who this man is, I believe that he is the best SEO in the world. Controversial, and now he's not gonna accept this compliment of mine.
No.
But anyways, let's let that settle in for a little bit. So he started at Search Metrics, went to Atlassian, Dailymotion, back to Atlassian, G2, and now you are the Director of SEO at Shopify, which is an amazing opportunity. We were talking about that. I was so pumped for you, like, personally, but also from, like, just being in an environment of, like, being around the smartest people ever. Congratulations, by the way. Congratulations are due.
Thank you.
First of all, what's going on with Shopify? Like, tell me, like, how did that happen, and, like, like, what type of team you work on and stuff? Because I think a lot of people, like, they see, like, oh, Director of SEO Shopify. Like, what does that actually mean at Shopify? Like, what are the types of things you're impacting? Like, what types of teams you work with and things like that? Because I think that's really interesting. I think a lot of folks find that role like a pretty amazing opportunity.
Yes, absolutely. It is a once in a lifetime opportunity. And you and I, Bill, before we started recording, we're chatting a little bit about, like, sometimes these lifetime opportunities just come around unexpectedly. And I feel like I had that privilege several times throughout my career, but Shopify certainly is one of these opportunities. And before I joined Shopify, I wasn't looking for a job at all. I was very happy at G2, and my intent was to stay there for years, take the company public, and make this kind of my opus. And then I was connected with the VP of Growth, the man who runs all of growth. His name is Luc Levesque. He's a legend. He sold a startup to TripAdvisor, then built the whole TripAdvisor team, SEO team and growth team.
Serious SEO team.
Yeah, an insane SEO team. And most of those are at Shopify now. He then went on to Google, then he went to Facebook. He's a buddy of Zuckerberg. And then went to come run growth at Shopify. So absolute legend. And I've already learned a ton of him. He's my boss. And I was connected to him through a former mentor and boss of mine, who I also learned an insane amount of things from, and who I really look up to. And he connected us because Luke was looking for a director of SEO. And, the thing is, I wasn't looking for a job, but when somebody like Luke knocks on your door, you better
pick
open
up the phone.
See what he says. Yes, you pick up the phone. And so I did. And it took him all of 10 minutes to convince me that that my time was better spent at Shopify. And one of the biggest reasons is, besides the incredibly smart people and the huge opportunity that the company Shopify is, also that it aligns very strongly with my personal mission. So you can fact check me. I have my personal mission on my site for years. And it is that I do believe that technology can substantially improve our lives. And so my mission is to make sure that the right technology comes to the right people and to make it as successful as possible. The mission of Shopify is to make e-commerce better for everyone, which sounds very narrow, but what it actually means is to give everybody, wherever they live, whoever they are, a fair chance of building a business and sustain themselves. And that is very close to my personal mission, right? And so that was one of the main reasons for why I joined the company. And I haven't regretted it a single second. It's been an amazing ride so far.
Yeah, when we were talking before, and you were like, "Hey, like this," I was like, "Wow, amazing opportunity!" First of all, and it's also cool that you mentioned the mission, which I also am a huge believer in, like giving people the opportunity to succeed. They just announced the what is it, that they don't take a rev cut up until the first $1 million in sales? Is that what I saw?
Yeah, exactly. We recently had our big conference, Unite, which is something like Apple's WWDC. We decided that we don't take a revenue cut from our app developers. We have a big app store. It's a huge part of our ecosystem. And we decided to not take a cut from them until they reach $1 million in revenue. And by the way, that resets every year. We also don't take more than 15%, where many other app stores might charge a 30% cut. We decided that we really just wanted to take a 15% cut, because for us, the ecosystem is so much more important than the revenue that we can make from developers. And the big thing that we really live every day is that we're a platform. And what really defines a platform is if people who build on the platform are more successful than the platform itself, right? We want to embrace that. We want to live that. And that's why we decided that, we want to make it easier for app developers to build great businesses on top of our platform.
That's awesome. Yeah, I felt the same kind of mission when I was at HubSpot. My dad had a small business when I was a kid, and it was a real struggle to grow the business because, he's an engineer. He doesn't understand like growth and sales and all this other stuff. And I always saw that. And then I started over there and I saw the amazing combination of like sales and kind of technical talent that they had there. And like the whole idea was like just helping people, taking the friction out of the way of people being able to do things. Like we're on Riverside, like we are like able to create stuff. And I know you and I are around the same age, not to age myself because I'm an old man now, but like it wasn't that easy and it wasn't that long ago, right? So like 10 years from now, who knows, man, Shopify might be, bigger than it already is. Like I see a lot of exciting things going on there with the fintech stuff that they're building and like the integration to all these different platforms to make things easier. It's a pretty cool mission. I'm happy for you.
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate that. I truly believe that Shopify is going to be the next FANG company. It's going to be in that league. And so being part of scaling a company to that level is a huge privilege and a huge honor. And it's funny because you mentioned your dad is an engineer, and engineering is a good segue into kind of answering your question, or the second part of your question, which is what is my role actually. Yep. So I'm part of the growth organization, as I already mentioned. Engineering is very, very near and dear to our hearts. And I do lead all the efforts that have to do with SEO. The way that Shopify growth is structured is interesting. There are two different types of teams. There's the craft side. So SEO would be a craft, paid search would be a craft, email would be a craft. And I run 6 different SEO teams. So anything that has to do with SEO kind of falls into my craft. But I'm also the mission lead for SEO. So missions, we spoke about missions earlier, but it's not the same. Like what we call missions are cross-functional teams that go after the same goal. And so a mission would consist of engineers, data scientists, SEOs, UX people, operations people, and so on and so on. And I'm also the mission lead of SEO. I go after pretty much anything that has to do with organic growth, whether it be blog content, tools, app store. It's a very, very broad scope.
Yeah, that sounds. We talked about that briefly before, and it sounds like it's an amazing opportunity. You've able to touch a lot of aspects of the company. It seems like there's a concerted effort at Shopify to help e-commerce owners as well also do better or more effective SEO. Like, can you talk a little bit more about like what their plan? Well, you can't give away the secret sauce, but like, do they want to build more products to help people do more effective like growth on their own? Is that like the plan for you as well? Like, are you part of those conversations?
I'm part of the conversations. I'm not the main responsible person for merchant SEO, right? Like we do have a strong input role for the product teams that work on SEO features in the actual platform, but that doesn't fall under my responsibility area, right? So we're part of the conversation. We're not the deciders, right? So a lot of people think, oh, cool, that he's director of SEO. That must mean that he works on the SEO features in the platform. It's not accurate. I play more of a consulting role, so to say. We do push some things forward. We are the bridge between the SEO community and the product developers, the product organization. And we do push very hard on making sure that the platform stays SEO friendly. But as you correctly said, the goal of a platform is to make any channel available, whether that's TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Google Ads, anything you can really imagine. We want to make accessible so that merchants can choose for themselves. How do they want to grow the company and not be too dependent on a single channel.
So one of the things I want to mention is you put out a ton of content on your own website, kevin-indig.com. Everybody, please, if you have not gone, register and get the information Kevin's putting out. It is fire, and it is super useful every single time. You've been talking a lot about the future of like how to grow, and I think you've been putting out some really interesting thoughts about what the future might hold for both SEO and also just growing a brand in general. One of the things that I've noticed, because I've been following your content even before we like met and became like buddies or whatever, like I always was reading your newsletter or whatever you were up to. And I've noticed that you spend a lot of time on like video and social content for your personal brand. And like but then you've also got this deep SEO expertise. Like what is building your own brand like taught you about growth? And like what are some of the things that you're excited about right now?
It all came out of passion. There wasn't this grand plan. At first, it was, just like being a part of the SEO community and just enjoying sharing, interacting, responding on Twitter, these kind of things. And the newsletter, just like the podcast and the YouTube channel, they all grew organically. I was writing a lot for myself. I'm like an avid note taker. I have this like digital brain that I've been building. I already had like a lot of content ready. At some point I was like, you know what, might as well publish it on a personal blog. I had a blog like 8 years ago, 10 years ago or something like that, very early on, and then lost interest. I think it's in part because I was too new in my career and didn't really like know what to say. Whereas now I would go back and I would just like document what I learned. I think that's actually a very powerful way to build a brand, even if you don't have a lot of expertise and knowledge yet. You just like document what you learn. So elegant. So anyway, a couple of years ago, I thought, hey, why don't I just publish some of the content that I write for myself? Anyway, that went pretty well. I had a bigger interest then in speaking at conferences, and all these things kind of reinforced each other, So I was thinking about, okay, what can you speak about at this conference? And then I gave that talk, and then I turned that into a blog article, and that spurred responses from people, which then became another presentation, which then became a blog article, right? So kind of like a content flywheel. A very similar thing happened with the podcast and the YouTube channel. As probably everybody who listens to podcasts knows, you often like you go to conferences, not in the last 1.5 years, right? But like before that and starting soon, you go to conferences and you have these amazing conversations. Sometimes, 100%. At like midnight at the bar or something like that, but you just have these amazing conversations with people.
In my case, that's been most of them. Yeah. But, but I will say like the people and the conversations you have, they're way more open to talking about what's really working when you're in person and, you have that connection between people, right?
And that's super powerful. And it's very, very important in SEO. SEO is a crowdsourced body of knowledge, right? And it is a discipline because people share. It would not be a discipline without people sharing. So it's super important. It's vital. And conferences play a central part of that. And, I had many of these conversations, and at some point I was like, man, I wish I could record that and look at it the next day. And then I thought, geez, like, why don't record it, make it available for everyone? And so what you see is that the first episodes of my podcast were all in person. Now it's all virtual. Soon I'll go back to in person, but that's incredibly powerful. And so I wanted to capture these moments that you typically have at conferences when, like you really riff off of each other, you share notes, and it's that kind of experience that I wanted to bring. So all of that happened organically. But sure, as some of these things caught traction, as I reached a certain Twitter follower count or reached a certain number of subscribers to my newsletter, I then thought, okay, like how can I formalize that into an actual strategy? But I still have this kind of reinforcement loop where a thing that I do on Twitter reinforces a blog article, reinforces a presentation, reinforces a podcast. And it is like a whole circle that just, spins and spins and spins.
Yeah. What you just said, I can relate to so much. Like I've had all these ideas for content And what ends up happening is I get too busy and then I end up doing something else. I've found that the creative process or putting out content like this helps me talk through things and like process those thoughts. So like, you know, when we were talking on your podcast and I was talking about content briefs, and then like the next day I'm like, I think I'm missing something here. Like it could be a lot more interesting. And so I started typing up notes in like a blog post. I'm like, how would I go present on this topic if I had to formally do it in a certain way? And I think the more reps you get, I think that's basically like, not to throw in a weightlifting reference, Kevin, but
I love it.
The more reps you get, like it's easier for you to process these things and get through some of the thoughts you might want to express externally, whether it's in a presentation or something.
No doubt. Because it's one of the most powerful lessons I learned in my life. Most people just scratch the surface of knowledge. They store something in their brain and it stays there maybe for a little bit, and then it's being replaced by something else or it's being forgotten. But the smartest people, they constantly question their assumptions, right? So they say, okay, this is the way I understand things, but they never try to like bulletproof that or question that or attack that. But writing is a way to have a conversation with yourself and go deep. Ask yourself 5 times why, you know, and really understand things at an atomic level, at a fundamental level. And the other thing is that, you know, these conversations are extremely valuable. But when you talk to another person, there's a lot of ego involved, right? And that's human. But it's like either people feel shame when they realize that their ideas are not standing on solid pillars, or they just don't want to. It's often also just a harsh awakening to realize, oh man, what I thought is actually not as true. But when you write, you have that conversation with yourself, right? You can go deep. You can question your assumptions. You come out as a smarter man or a woman, right? Like it's a really great way to explore your ideas and explore your understanding of things. Reality is, if you really question what you know, you very quickly hit the wall. You know, like we actually know very little on a deep level, but there are a lot of cognitive biases and fallacies that lead us to believe that because we're specialists in one area, we're also specialists in this other area. It's not true. So it's a long and windy way to say that you're absolutely right. I think writing is thinking, writing is power. You can improve your skills and your knowledge simply by writing more, by thinking about how to structure a presentation, and by anticipate questions and question assumption.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like the process of having an idea, kind of mapping out how you could execute it, doing a test, validating why it broke, going through those processes. I don't care how much you read about it until you actually go through it and actually go through the mental energy. And also like something I've noticed is like sleeping on things helps me process things. So like if I have an idea one day and I write like some notes in you should see my WordPress, or I'm sorry, my Squarespace where my site is, there's like 4,000 blog posts that are like 20% done. And I'll often come back to it and I'm like, I don't think that that's fully baked. Like I could do a little bit more about it, or like it's not quite there yet. Whether it's like, it doesn't have to be a podcast. It could just be like an Evernote, right? Like where you keep a lot of your notes, coming back to those things, working through them, actually running tests. Like good example is somebody was like, hey, what do you think about the state of like AI content? And I was like, well, I'm not sure, to be honest with you. Like I've run some tests like a long time ago. So I was like, okay, let me take a challenge to myself. And like, how quickly could I create like a 2,000 word article? And so I ended up just going in 2.5 hours, was able to like automate the research, like create the article, like do all the optimization, stuff like that. And I was like, oh, this actually changed my entire opinion on the future of SEO and content, having gone through this process once myself. But you have to be in the weeds sometimes, otherwise you're just too far away from what's actually reality, right?
Absolutely. It's so important to acknowledge that most people probably have 3 to 20 amazing ideas in their lives, right? If you look at like some of the biggest authors or thinkers, right, they're popular for a couple of ideas, but these ideas grow over time, right? They grow slowly and they're like a garden. You have to water that. You have to nourish it. It needs some sun. It needs some time. It needs to withstand some hard weather so it grows stronger. And it's the same with our understanding of SEO or any other discipline, right? You start,
100% agreed.
You kind of understand some of the basics. You're like, okay, this makes sense. Then you need to water it with some practical experience. That makes sense. And then you need to like keep questioning, why is that? Why is that? Why? And then you get to some more atomic fundamental truths, and you need to water those as well. And from that, grow ideas and deeper understanding. But it's something that needs critical thinking, practical experience, talking to other people, withstanding the change, right? Like Google and SEO specifically changed a lot over the last years. If you keep these ideas in some format, whether it's like written down or even just in your head, and you water them over time and you nourish them and grow them, then they can become immensely powerful, right? So this idea of tipper, for example, that's like one concept that made the rounds a little bit in SEO. That started, at Atlassian. That was like 5 years ago, at least. And that's an idea that I, first explored in the company, then stress tested with the company. Then I brought it to a conference, Tech SEO Boost in 2018, got stress tested there, and it got better over time. Then I wrote some blog articles, discussed it on Twitter, helped a couple of companies to implement it, which all, by the way, have been tremendously successful. And there I learned new things, right? So these like little plants that grow into trees, but they need time and thinking and stress testing and exploration.
Yeah, same thing. I mean, like similar context at HubSpot, watching when Matt Barbie first joined and reading his first wiki post and talking about like content clusters and hubs and interlinking and context and like how things relate to each other. And then that was the hypothesis. And then seeing the how the marketing team carried it out, and me as an observer being like, wow, this is amazing to watch it happen kind of as an observer. I wasn't on the marketing team at the time, but it actually leveled my own SEO skills up just to kind of understand what is the frameworks. Why does he think that way? That's the most important thing. Like whenever we have a conversation or I talk about anybody in the growth world, it's not about the answer. It's like, what were the things they thought about that got them to that answer? First time I saw like, somebody like doing like black hat stuff, I was like, I don't want to do this because I think it's risky and this and that. But how did somebody go from 0 to 1 in that idea? Like, what was the framework that they used? They obviously saw some patterns in the way that Google interprets PageRank and this and that, and the ways that they could manipulate that. Those type of ideas, exposure to those things, the things you are putting out in Growth Memo, and the conversations you have at conferences and when you make friends in the industry, those are what separates, I think, most people who are in growth or SEO versus like I think the elite people is they're no longer about tactics. It's like those 0 to 1 ideas come from fundamentals that you just go through these processes, right?
Absolutely. Because then you can create your own tactics, right?
That's right.
The tactics are just the outcome of these principles. And as you said, these 0 to 1 ideas. In Growth Memo, you see a constant exploration of ideas. That's basically what the product is. It's just me thinking out loud. And eventually you see more of that taking shape and taking form, right? Like user intent is something very early on that it's not that I invented user intent, but this idea of reverse engineering user intent from the search results, that's an idea that you'll see baked slowly in this newsletter time over time. The same with like this idea of commodity content or trust or these kind of things, right? It's like a loud exploration of these ideas. And every time, that's the cool thing about the newsletter, by the way. There's no money for me. I make a tiny bit of money, sure, but it's not about the money, right? I have a job that pays bills. But the real value is to put that idea out there, even though it's half baked, and then getting that return. Most people don't understand that, and it takes a lot of humbleness, and I had to learn that a little bit. It's like taking that feedback and not being defensive at first. I think I had to learn that. I think I still learn that sometimes, but whenever I opened up to the idea, it made me stronger and made me better. And so, yeah, I see all these things that I do as an exploration of ideas, as a refinement of ideas. And then sure, there are second order benefits like hiring, for example, right? Like building a personal brand allowed me to hire some amazing people.
And you're hiring, by the way, right now. Anybody listening, go work for Kevin.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you. Thanks for doing my job. But yes, I am hiring. We have some amazing positions open, but that is easier. And it's less that it's just the personal brand is just a door opener, right? It's not that people join you because you have that brand. I think that would be a very arrogant way to think about it. It's more that people have heard your name and they're more open to having the conversation. And then you can convince them that they should spend their time at Shopify.
100%. Yeah. Like that's something, I mean, we could go probably down a personal branding rabbit hole because I think like you were one of the people that inspired me and now I'm starting to go down that path. And we were joking about like going down the camera rabbit hole before we got on here. And like those are, I think this is more of a gateway to that exploration. And I think the other thing too is like when you have an audience, you get a quicker feedback loop on these ideas. Instead of you like, doing something 6 months later, you maybe get some results and you're like, oh crap, actually that doesn't work. Like sometimes you'll get really intelligent people, whether it's like on Twitter or like, in response to the blog who are like, hey, cool idea, but here's why I think you're wrong. And if you take the ego out of that, you're like, wait a second, I just learned so much about how that person thinks. And like, maybe there are some holes in my game or like the way I'm thinking. That's one thing poker taught me. Like I'm having Dylan Wiseman, who's an absolute legend, on in a couple weeks, plays like the highest stakes in the world. And I can't wait to talk about like poker and business analogies. Every opportunity for you to learn, the quicker you can do that. And I think content and personal brand helps you accelerate that process because you get exposure to people that are doing things different ways, you know?
It also helps you to separate your decisions and your thought patterns from resulting, right? That's a poker term that I learned from Andy Duke, wrote a book that really impacted me, called Thinking in Bets. This idea of resulting is that we as humans tend to rate the quality of a decision or a thought by the result, but we ignore that there are more factors that impact the outcome of a decision, like luck, randomness, and a couple other things. I think that's an important piece, right? Like where when you explore an idea, especially in SEO or in growth, it's quick to result and to like say, okay, this is why things are the way they are.
Maybe it's a 51-49 spot and you just roll the right thing. You know?
Exactly. And at the same time, getting feedback from other people allows you to detach that, to say, hey, no, maybe it's not because of that, maybe it's because of this. And so your thought patterns and assumptions become stronger because of that.
Yeah, those are great mental frameworks, like irrespective of whatever you do, like challenging yourself, like why did this happen? What could have gone wrong? Those are the types of things that I think, like, if you want to be in a leadership role and you want to get out of that day-to-day, like, tactical role, these types of things in challenging yourself is very important. But I feel like we don't have enough time. We could do this podcast for like 5 hours.
Yeah, we should.
Okay, so I have a bunch of questions, but I'm going to just limit it to the one I think would be most interesting to people who are listening. You've been at Atlassian. You've done some amazing work at Atlassian, G2, Shopify. I'm obsessed with this idea of turning what we just talked about, ideas like breakthrough experiments, great SEO processes, into this idea of engines. We talked a lot about that at Drift, which is like, okay, you've got a thing about, you know, link building or distribution, or you've got this thing about content or product-led SEO. How would you build a process around that and basically build an engine around that? So like, you know, those are big brands, Atlassian, G2, Shopify. They're largely not a sales-based motion, except for G2, right? They have a sales team, and so you know there's a lot of folks that are working on there. But you're doing large-scale SEO with, you know, potentially sometimes millions of pages. What are like the fundamental Kevin Indig like things that you look for at companies when you're talking about SEO success? And like, if you know, these are things that could be transferred to either a e-commerce or a SaaS business, et cetera. Like there's some fundamental things that I think you have probably nailed that maybe some folks who are very worried about algorithm updates or like, you know, the new like thing, like what are the things that you're putting all your focus on, or a large percent of your focus, the 80-20 rule? I get 80% of my results from these 20% of things, or like I focus on most of my time and attention on these specific things to grow SEO.
Yeah, it's a really good question. It all begs to answer, how do we scale organic traffic? That's kind of the fundamental question. And the answer depends on, it always depends on something in SEO. It depends.
I'm going to have to quote that one right there. It depends. That's it. Good night.
It's a classic. But let me tell you what it depends on. It depends on your business model. And fundamentally, you can divide business models into 3 different types. There are integrators, aggregators, and platforms. Now, platforms and integrators are very similar, not exactly the same, but they're similar and related in the way they scale. So let's keep it focused on integrators and aggregators right now.
You want to define those real quick for people that maybe have no idea what you're talking about? I've read all I've gone through all this stuff, so I'm familiar. But explain it for the people who are listening.
Absolutely, yeah, it's important. So an aggregator is basically a business that aggregates demand based on superior user experience and zero marginal cost, and as a result, has power over supply. That is, by the way, a concept that Ben Thompson from Stratechery came up with, but we can perfectly apply that to SEO and growth as well. An
example of that would be like a popular site people are familiar with?
Yeah, exactly. So like a Facebook, an Amazon, Uber, Google, these are all aggregators. Yep. They aggregate search results, aggregate drivers, aggregate products, and that comes with massive scale effects. On the other side are integrators, which optimize the direct relationship with their customers. A good example is Disney or Apple, even though Apple does have some parts of its business that are more aggregators like app stores or aggregator-like. But in essence, those are more like direct to consumer businesses that optimize the relationship with the customers and optimize the product's value, right? They sell a product like content in the case of Disney, and their whole goal is to make that accessible to as many users as possible. And then, of course, increase the profit margin that they get per customer. That's kind of the high level aspect. And so from an SEO perspective, the approaches to SEO and growth are very different depending on whether you're an aggregator or integrator. Integrators lean much more on content marketing and company-generated content. Aggregators lean much more on technical SEO and leveraging user-generated content. At Atlassian, I was able to really practice and refine my integrator strategies. At G2, it was aggregator strategies because we aggregated product reviews. I already mentioned that, the difference between like technical SEO, user-generated content, and then content marketing on the other hand. At Atlassian, most of our SEO returns came from building content hubs, right? We had huge hubs around topics like Agile, DevOps, ITSM, Git, right? These are all topics that were very, very relevant for our products, but covered the whole kind of value chain from like, what is Agile to all the different Agile frameworks, which was, by the way, written by experts. It was really important. So we also had a blog at Atlassian that drove some results, but then we also had like a community, we had marketplace. So there were different formats, but in its essence, content hubs and this idea of creating content libraries was the main successor for SEO and growth. I mean, organic growth. At G2, the approach is very different. It was much more about like, how do we increase the content quality on every page, whether it's a category page, product page, alternatives, comparison, and so on. How do we leverage technical SEO scale effects, right?
So at the template level, right?
Exactly.
So
on the template level, internal linking, super important. Content on that page, super important. How do we increase those flywheel effects from like, people searching for a software review, finding us, getting value out of that, writing their own review, which leads other people to find our reviews and search results. And that was, super, super powerful.
So having we weren't like directly competing, but like there was, the room to grow in B2B SEO is getting a little bit harder than it used to be. In the past couple of years that aggregators were eating up a lot of that landscape in like the middle of the funnel. And I found that to be particularly fascinating because it's a lot easier to scale if you have a good architecture of your website. So the things that I was really fascinated with G2 is just the way that the website was set up in a way that is good for SEO, but it's also good for converting people and getting them into those loops. Let's just pick G2 because that was the most recent. And, I'm sure you've got a lot of things you're working on Shopify that you probably can or cannot say what you're working on. So let's just use G2 as an example. What were like the biggest bets you made, just like high level? Okay, so I walked into G2. Our business model is largely distributed. We want to be able to scale things. Like you built a lot of different aspects. You had the core site, you had different subdomains, you had a huge content team. Like if you zoomed out and said, hey, here are the things I spent the most amount of energy and time focusing on as a strategic SEO, what were those things? And like, what can some people learn from that maybe are struggling, who are like in that, do keyword research, write a blog post, like the linear growth pattern? What are some of the things that like you could transfer to the people maybe who are listening, who are in that kind of SEO thought process?
You mentioned the word bets, and it's funny because we literally called our biggest projects our big bets. And it's that idea, right? That sure, you want to have an idea of returns, you want to have a plan and a path, but at the end of the day, you often take bets, right? You go to a casino, you say, I have $5,000 that I spend, nothing more. And so what do I bet it on? And you want to be strategic in that decision, but at the end of the day, it's still a bet. We had several different bets, mostly went after bets in a 6 months cadence because things take time and time to implement, time to show results. But there were a couple of different things. You mentioned that the content part of it, a very large team of content writers, content marketers who were creating content on learn.g2.com. There was a company generated content model, and that was very editorial and allowed us to cover keywords that are very related to software categories that a review site would never rank for. It comes with a couple of benefits. On the one hand, you just increase your market share and you just capture more visitors, but on the other hand, it allows you to generate more backlinks. You can then link back to your categories. And that was very powerful. On the other hand, from the technical SEO aspect, we ran a lot of tests because we had a lot of scalable pages that we could group into buckets and then make changes to them and see what the impact was. So we test a lot of titled stuff, content things, internal linking. Another bet certainly was internal linking. Like when you deal with large sites, you have an internal link graph that can be optimized. That is very important to keep in mind. And that is also something you iterate on. Just sheer title tags, I think in my mind, are very, very underleveraged and very often forgotten. So we spend a ton of times getting those to a good place. And now I would say those are in an amazing place. Rich snippets, extremely powerful, especially when it comes to reviews, right? You get product review snippets. We played around with FAQ, with a couple of other things. We got featured snippets. Like these are all things that, because the site was so scalable and so templatized, right? Like getting a bullet point featured snippets was relatively straightforward because we had all the data. We just needed to get it in the right format. So we played a lot around, how did our results appear in the search results? What are scale effects? How can we improve our link profile? And how can we tinker with content to a degree that it's really valuable to users, and then it's also picked up by Google the way that we want to?
Yeah, I think like the intersection between product and SEO, I think, is going to be really exciting over the next few years, especially as the cost to acquire customers just continuing to go up. We've talked about this like offline like many times, and I think you're going to see a lot more like interesting experiments, especially as content becomes kind of like an easier to replicate process. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we talked about AI content before, right? That's going to be It's going to come. It's already here to a degree, I would argue. We as SEOs, as growth people, as writers, have to go deeper into the question, what is the value that people get out of content, right? What does the world will look like when it's very easy to create content? And how do you still provide value as a company? What is something that machines cannot easily replicate? And that is a question that every company has to answer for itself. But that, in my mind, will make a huge difference when it comes to competing over the next 5 years.
We went through several evolutions. At first in, early 2000s, it was like, just go as fast as possible, post as many of those 500-word blog posts as possible. And now, we went to the point where we had like a renaissance of, technical SEO and things like that. And now we're at the point where content is almost kind of like become anybody can produce it. It's really interesting when you think about like what those bets might be. And I have a few ideas of things I'd like to test out over the next few years. But you're starting a brand new e-commerce store, right? There's a lot of people who use Shopify. And maybe some people here are like, hey, I don't have engineers. I can't go build thousands of landing pages. I don't have an army of content people. And I don't know how to use AI and all these other things like resource constraint. If I was starting if you and I were going down the e-commerce path and we were going to start a workout equipment e-commerce site, which by the way, I'm down to do if you would like to do that.
Okay.
So like first year, what are the bets that you're placing? Like for people who maybe don't have like, enterprise resources and aren't like at that point, like what are the SEO bets that like they should be thinking about placing right now so that they can have success maybe in a year or short term, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So say I start a Shopify store and I sell a product direct to consumers, right? So also on the Shopify level, there are some stores that aggregate products and sell them as a marketplace almost. It's like a marketplace offering. And then there are other stores that sell a single product or a portfolio of products that they create themselves, right? And what I would call that DTC, even that marketplace portfolio of different brands is also a direct to consumer play. But let's just say like single product store. First, I think differentiation is super important. If you're the 50th candle store, you better have a very differentiated product or else it's going to be tricky, even though it might be perfectly fine to just sell to a local community, right? I think there is place for 50,000 candle stores if they all sell more locally than globally, even though the big opportunity behind the internet and e-commerce is to sell globally, right? Let's just say, I have a differentiated product. Then the first couple of questions I would ask myself is, how can I create content on product pages or on the product page that makes it super easy for people to buy? How can I recreate the customer service that I would get in a store on a landing page, on a product landing page. That's the first step. The second step is to think about what helpful content can I create on my blog in forms of tutorials or guides or even interviews. And I think a brand that comes to mind that did this very well is the Bullet Journal. So Bullet Journal they're basically selling a paper journal that follows a certain structure, which is the idea of like journaling. And so it's like a mix of like a diary and a calendar, so to say. I'm probably simplifying and not doing it justice, right? But that's what they sell. And so they really thought hard about, okay, what kind of content can we create that's valuable to our customers? And so they came up with a couple of interviews. For example, they interviewed Cal Newport and provided that in written form. And so now they rank for all sorts of like deep work or minimalism type of keywords and ranked number one, right? So there's a myth out there that you can't rank number one Shopify. There are many examples that prove the opposite, and Bullet Journal is a very good one. They have that kind of interesting content where they have thought leaders that use the product, but then they also create some guides. You know, how to bullet journal, or how to journal in general. What are different journaling techniques? Where they also rank number one, for example. And so they create this helpful extension to their product in the form of content, of written content, that performs really well because it is a gateway and an entrance point for customers. It helps to understand how deep that topic is, why there is a need to buy that product. So it even guides them along the buyer journey. And so that's the second step. And as a third step, I would say there are probably 10, 20 steps, right? But as a third step, to not prolong that too much, is to build a brand to make sure you have a solid authority or backlink profile in Google's eyes. And that happens on many channels, right? I would say it happens on social channels, happens to a degree with your content, maybe with some paid ads, but basically happy customers, a good product, a good differentiated product, and some aiding content will really help you build that brand.
Boom. That's it. Just like that. Nice and easy. Yeah, I think like e-commerce SEO is really interesting, or like growth in general, because I'm seeing a lot of interesting dynamics between like influencer and like branding along with the performance marketing when it's right. But I think one of the things that you mentioned that's really cool is this idea of like not just focusing on more acquisition. It's like, are you sure that you can monetize and serve every single customer just like you would if they walked in their front door? Once you have that in place, then you start to worry about, acquiring and pushing a lot more folks into the funnel. Exactly. Because we always get in this never-ending acquisition hunger, right? Pretty cool. All right, Kevin, what do you got going on this year, man? What's going on with you? You got any conferences coming up, or like anything you're doing with TechBound or Growth Memo or anything like that people need to hear, and then we can give a little bit of time back in your day.
Yeah, thanks, man. I do speak at a couple conferences. I cannot yet, or I'm not allowed yet to officially confirm all of them. Some of them are still in the planning stages, so they kept asking me to keep that quiet. However, I toned down the number of speaking gigs tremendously. And so now what I do is I want to have maybe 5 speaking gigs a year, but really pointed, really stand out, crisp, fundamental ideas. And so the next one that is certainly confirmed is SEO.com in Austria, in Salzburg. That's coming up in November. And then there are going to be probably 2 more. When it comes to TechBound, I have 8 videos right now in editing. So there's going to be a lot of cool content, a lot of cool interviews coming out. One of them is with you, Bill. And then in terms of Growth Memo, just growing, man. I'm really close to 5,000 subscribers. It's going to be a big milestone for myself. I'll just keep churning out and keep baking these ideas publicly.
Yeah, I will put all the links to all this stuff because not only do I appreciate you as a friend, but also I'm just a huge fan of the way you think about growth SEO and things like that, because it's rooted in fundamentals that I think are different from most of the stuff that you find out there, which I think is awesome.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Bill. Certainly consider you a friend myself, and you're an amazing guy. Thanks so much for all the kindness. My pleasure. Kevin Indig, the legend, Director of SEO Shopify, also amazing gamer. We should talk about that another time. Well, that'll be another podcast. We can do that another time. Yes, sir. Weightlifting. Thanks for having me, man. Thank you.